Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden porch of the Dusty Creek Diner, where Eleanor Marsh wrung out her mop with hands that had grown calloused from 3 years of honest work. At 42, she had learned that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you unless you handed it over willingly. And she had no intention of doing that today or any other day. The bell above the door chimed, and Eleanor didn't need to look up to know who had walked in. The expensive boots made a distinct sound against her freshly cleaned floors, a sound that immediately made her grip the mop handle tighter. Clayton Mercer had a way of announcing his presence that went beyond mere physicality. He occupied space like he owned it, which in this small Montana town he practically did. "Morning, Eleanor," his deep voice carried across the empty diner. It was barely 6:30, too early for the regular breakfast crowd, which meant he had come specifically when he knew she would be alone. She continued mopping, not giving him the satisfaction of her full attention. "Mr. Mercer, kitchen. Doesn't open for another hour. I'm not here for breakfast." He settled himself into a booth near the window, the leather of his jacket creaking as he leaned back. At 55, Clayton Mercer was what the local women called distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun while surveying his vast property. His ranch, the Double M, sprawled across 12,000 acres of prime Montana land, and everyone in town knew that Clayton's grandfather had won half of it in a poker game 3 generations ago. Eleanor kept her eyes on the floor, watching the soapy water create patterns on the worn linoleum. "Then I'm afraid I can't help you. Can't or won't." There was amusement in his voice, the kind that made her want to dump the entire mop bucket over his expensive boots. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze with the steady resolve that had carried her through burying a husband, raising 2 children alone, and rebuilding a life from the ashes of everything she had known. "Is there a difference when it comes to you, Mr. Mercer?" He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed at odds with his reputation as the shrewdest businessman in the county. "I do enjoy our conversations, Eleanor. You're the only person in this town who doesn't treat me like I'm made of money." "That's because I've learned that money doesn't make a man," she replied, resuming her mopping. "Character does, and from what I've seen, the jury's still out on yours." Clayton's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. "You know, I watched you yesterday, through the window." Eleanor's hands stilled on the mop. "That's a strange thing to admit. I watched you clean this entire place from top to bottom. You scrubbed every table, polished every surface, mopped every inch of this floor." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "And when you were done, you stood right there by the counter and smiled. Ely smiled, like you had just accomplished something magnificent." Heat crept up Eleanor's neck, though she couldn't say if it was from embarrassment or anger. "Are you mocking me, Mr. Mercer?" "I'm admiring you," he said, his voice losing some of its teasing edge. "I saw you mop your satisfaction right off that floor yesterday, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Eleanor set the mop aside and crossed her arms, studying the man who had been a thorn in her side for the past year. Clayton Mercer had started coming into the diner regularly about 12 months ago, always sitting in her section, always leaving outrageous tips that she refused to accept, always finding ways to engage her in conversation despite her best efforts to remain professional and distant. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tired. "Really? Because I don't have time for games. I've got 2 kids in college, a mortgage that doesn't pay itself, and exactly 0 patience for whatever this is." Clayton was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. The teasing quality was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable. My wife passed 8 years ago. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. I know, I'm sorry. After she died, I threw myself into the ranch, built it up, expanded, acquired more land, made more money than I could ever spend in 3 lifetimes. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. And you know what I realized about 6 months ago? She waited, saying nothing. I realized that I hadn't smiled like you did yesterday in almost a decade. Real satisfaction, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful with your own 2 hands. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Eleanor felt some of her defensive walls begin to crack, though she wasn't ready to let them crumble entirely. So what, you've been coming here to study me like some kind of science experiment? Learn how the working sea lass finds joy? I've been coming here because you're the most genuine person I've ever met, he said simply, and because being around you makes me want to be better than I am. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor picked up her mop again, needing something to do with her hands. You don't know me, Mr. Mercer? You know the woman who serves you coffee and wipe down your table. I know that you work double shifts every holiday so the younger waitresses can spend time with their families. I know that you pay for old Mr. Henderson's breakfast every Tuesday because his social security check doesn't stretch far enough. I know that you stayed 2 hours late last month to help the new girl practice her table service because she was terrified of getting fur. He stood up from the booth and walked toward her, stopping when he was just a few feet away. I know that when your husband died, you sold your house, moved into that tiny apartment above the hardware store, and put every penny into your children's education because you believed their futures mattered more than your comfort. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. How do you know all that? Because I pay attention. Because you matter. He reached out as if to touch her arm, then thought better of it and let his hand fall. And because I've been trying to work up the courage to ask you to have dinner with me for the past 6 months, but every time I try, you hit me with that sharp tongue of yours and I lose my nerve. A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. Clayton Mercer, losing his nerve. I find that hard to believe. Well, believe it. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes fully. You terrify me, Eleanor Marsh. You're strong and proud, and you don't need anyone, least of all a foolish old rancher who's spent too many years hiding behind his bank account. Eleanor leaned on her mop, really looking at him for the first time. Beyond the expensive clothes and the confident posture, she saw something she recognized. Loneliness. The same loneliness that kept her awake at night, that made her throw herself into work so she wouldn't have to face the empty apartment waiting for her. My husband was a good man, she said quietly. He worked himself to death trying to provide for us. Heart attack at 45, right in the middle of the hardware store. He was buying supplies to fix our porch railing. I'm sorry. After he died, I made a promise to myself. I would never depend on anyone again. I would never put myself in a position where someone else's choices could destroy my life. She met his eyes. That's why I've been pushing you away. Not because I don't see you, but because I can't afford to see you. Clayton nodded slow. I understand that. More than you know. He took a step back, giving her space. But I wonder if maybe we've both been protecting ourselves so fiercely that we've forgotten how to live. Eleanor was quiet, turning his words over in her mind like stones worn smooth by water. Through the window she could see the town beginning to wake up. Lights flickering on in the bakery across the street. Tea He newspaper delivery truck making its rounds. The first hints of traffic on the main road. "I get off at 3 today," she heard herself say, the words surprising her almost as much as they seemed to surprise him. "There's a coffee shop 2 towns over in Millbrook, neutral territory." Clayton's face transformed, years seeming to fall away as he smiled. "I know the place. The one with the Terry." "Le Pie?" "The very same." Eleanor felt the corners of her mouth twitching upward despite her best efforts. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. And you're not going to buy me anything expensive or try to impress me with your money. Wouldn't dream of it." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Eleanor? Yes? That satisfaction I saw yesterday, when you finished mopping this floor? I want to feel that again. I want to build something with my own hands, something that matters. I was thinking maybe I could use some help figuring out how." She picked up her mop and dunked it back into the bucket, the familiar motion grounding her. "That's going to take more than 1 cup of bad coffee, Mr. Mercer." "Good. Thing I'm a patient man." He tipped an imaginary hat to her and walked out into the morning sunlight. Eleanor stood alone in the diner, the clock on the wall ticking steadily toward opening time. She looked down at the floor she had mopped countless times, at the tables she had wiped down until she knew every scratch and stain by heart. This place had been her refuge, her proving ground, the evidence that she could survive anything life threw at her. But survival wasn't the same as living. She'd known that deep down for a while now. She just hadn't been ready to admit it. The bell chimed again, and the morning prep cook shuffled in, bleary-eyed and yawning. Eleanor squared her shoulders and headed toward the kitchen, ready to start another day of hard work and honest labor. But for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to what came after. At 3 o'clock, Eileen hung up her apron and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the coat hooks. Her hair was escaping its bun, there were shadows under her eyes, and she smelled faintly of coffee and bacon grease. She made no move to fix any of it. Clayton was waiting outside in a dusty pickup truck, instead of the luxury SUV she had expected. He got out when he saw her and opened the passenger door. And he noticed that he had changed out of his expensive jacket into a simple flannel shirt that had seen better days. "Neutral territory," he said, gesturing to the truck. "And nothing impressive." Eleanor climbed in, noting the cracked leather seats and the faint smell of hay and horses. "This doesn't look like it belongs to a rich rancher. It belonged to my father. He bought it the year I was born, and he drove it until the day he died." Clayton started the engine, which coughed twice before turning over. "My mother wanted me to sell it, said it was an embarrassment. But some things matter more than appearances." As they drove through the Montana countryside, past rolling hills and distant mountains and endless sky, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built so carefully, brick by brick, were still there. But for the first time in a long time, she could imagine a door in them, a way through. The coffee shop in Millbrook was exactly as terrible as she remembered. The pie was worse, but the conversation flowed easily, surprisingly so, ranging from childhood memories to lost spouses, to dreams they had set aside and might yet wreckle. Aim. When Clayton dropped her back at the diner 4 hours later, the sun was setting and her cheeks hurt from laughing. "Same time next week?" he asked, something hopeful in his voice that made him seem younger than his years. Eleanor considered the question, considered the risk, considered the alternative of returning to her empty apartment and her carefully constructed solitude. "Same time, next week," she agreed. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she thought about what Clayton had said that morning. about mopping satisfaction off the floor. He was right that she had found joy in her work, in the simple act of making something clean and orderly and good. But she was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, there was room for more than one kind of satisfaction in her life. She wasn't ready to tear down her walls, but she could start by opening a window, and in a dusty pickup truck heading back to a 12,000-acre ranch, Clayton Mercer was smiling the kind of smile he had almost forgotten how to make, the kind that came from somewhere real, the kind that looked a lot like hope.